Dan and Amy, and we're talking about the Benghazi report, the 800-page report produced and released by the House Select Committee on Benghazi. Trey Gowdy addressed the assembled press yesterday to issue a bit of a challenge, number one, to read the report, which, come on.
Read
Trey.
the report? Who's got time for that?
Come on, Trey. Or the reading skills. But what he wanted those to do, in addition to reading the report, is as you're reading the report, take particular note of private knowledge in comparison to public statements.
I want you to contrast the information and the evidence that was available on the evening of September the 11th. Look at the full body of evidence that was available, and then look at what was said. And then you draw your own conclusion of whether or not you made the best use of the evidence and the information that was available. It is one thing to say the evidence didn't exist. It existed. We found them. We found the DS agents. We found the GRS agents. Their conversations ongoing throughout the night. She actually talked to Greg Hicks. So that argument actually works both ways. If there's a failure of information, she was fairly definitive in certain statements she made to other people privately. There was no ambiguity. It wasn't like, I can't answer that question, Mr. Egyptian political leader, we don't know. She was pretty definitive. It was just in the public statements to us that there was less definitiveness. So you're going to have to decide that for yourself.
And Hillary, acting as a spokesman for the Washington Press Corps, said this in response.
So I'll leave it to others to characterize this report, but I think it's pretty clear it's time to move on.
Well, we're not moving on quite yet.
So insincere.
The press corps is. The press corps has.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they said there's no smoking gun. They read it all. I'm sure they did. Mm-hmm.
This was received with a collective yawn. Finally, it's over. Finally, we can formally absolve and conclusively absolve Hillary and just get on about our business of flacking for her. Well, for more on the report and the work of that committee, we're joined by a member of the House Select Committee on Benghazi and thus, by extension, a member of the vast right-wing conspiracy. He is Congressman Peter Roskam, who joins us now. Peter, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan and Amy, good to be with you guys.
So Trey Gowdy didn't want to use the term liar in describing Hillary Clinton, but the record suggests that not only is she is inveterate and unrepentant.
Look, she knew the truth, and she told something else. I don't know how else to characterize that, and it was nearly contemporaneous. So she's conflating these issues, creating this false narrative, along with many others in the administration. So this is a larger theme, but many others in the administration that started that night. She gives a statement shortly after 10 o'clock on the night of the attacks, essentially, and then within a very short period of time, she's communicating privately through an email with her daughter that says nothing about a video and is declarative that it was a terrorist attack. And similarly, when she's interacting with the Egyptian leadership, when she's interacting with the Libyan leadership, all the same thing. And I think, this is part of this, the part of evaluating this and investigating this for the past couple of years. My takeaway is this jarring contrast between the heroism, the initiative, the self-sacrifice that was happening on the ground in Benghazi and was happening in Tripoli as CIA agents were trying to get to Benghazi, and just the cavernous difference between basically dithering and politics and nonsense that was happening in Washington, D.C. at the same time. It is shocking to actually learn these facts and to see them posted next to one another.
So 4 lives lost, 600 requests for security, and no one came to their rescue because they were too busy figuring out the politics of it all, figuring out what the Marines were going to wear.
Amy, so this is
high
what
school.
happened. The President of the United States learns. So the attack happens Washington, D.C. time about 3:42 p.m. Okay. About 5 o'clock, the President is notified, and the President says, do everything to help these people. He gives the order to Leon Panetta. Panetta then gathers his team as the Secretary of Defense. They evaluate the assets. At 7 o'clock, Panetta gives an order, deploy. Now, here's where it really starts to break down. It just doesn't happen. And here's the scandal. Part of it is there was never any asset that was ever going to Benghazi. Never. There were 2 unarmed drones. It's arguable that one of them could have been armed, maybe, but 2 unarmed drones showed up, and the guys from Tripoli showed up. But in terms of the initiative from Washington, that feeling wheels up and help is on the way, never happened. Nothing was ever going to Benghazi.
Well, so how can the president give a directive and the Secretary of Defense reiterate that directive and nothing moves?
Nothing moves because the Department of Defense didn't move with dispatch. And so that's a big problem. And I think moving forward, we've got to sort this out. Because, look, America asks its citizens to go to dangerous places and do difficult things. And the deal that we make with them as diplomats, as members of the clandestine services, as members of the military, is you go in there, there's an assumption of the risk, but we're going to do everything as a country to mitigate that risk. And if the wheels come off the cart, we're going to do everything we can to rescue you. And that didn't happen. So what does that tell diplomats? What does that tell forward-leaning clandestine operators or members of the military who's got their back? And just think about this. Can you imagine if this was an Israeli operation? Can you imagine Netanyahu sitting back and doing essentially nothing or not following up, or the Israeli military, them just wringing their hands and literally thinking about politics?
Who has blood on their hands here, though? I mean, who's the one when the Marines were ready to go, and then they said, "Well, change your clothes into civilian clothes." No, change back. Now change again. I mean, who was initiating that directive?
4 times, Amy, and it took 3 hours for these guys to change and change and change and change. I mean, ultimately, the American public has to ask and answer that question: to whom is the responsibility allied? But who bears the burden?
Who?
The families bear the burden, and the 4 guys who were killed, they bear the burden. And
right.
So this is a shame, and I mean that literally. This is a shame. This is a shameful thing to learn that our country failed these people so miserably.
But here's the thing, and this is what we're trying to get to, is specific culpability. That the whole government is always mistakes were made, the mistakes made themselves. No, people made those mistakes up and down the chain of command, from Hillary Clinton to Leon Panetta, and then down perhaps to military officers who didn't execute the order that they were given by Panetta. But are we going to see any people actually whistled in to say, you were told to do this and you didn't do it, and that's a problem, and your career is over as a senior military official? Nobody is held responsible. Everybody's responsible, so no one's responsible.
Yeah, I take your point, and I agree with you. And that is one of the really jarring and maddening things. And just to make matters a little bit worse, just to pile on, this was a mistake in terms of the policy going in. Never got a straight answer, by the way. If there was gun running involved, the administration would never answer that question. It was a mistake as it was happening. So Chris Stevens is sent to Libya. The first time he goes in, he is supposed to be accompanied by the military. Then at the last minute, the boots-on-the-ground policy says, oh, no military accompanying for you. And he goes in without even diplomatic immunity. He goes in without even the cover of the Geneva Convention. So think about that. Time after time after time, they have requested more security support. One diplomatic security agent we learned went out there, came back and said, this is a suicide mission. Everybody here is going to die, and that is well in advance of the September 11th attack. So it's a mistake going in, it's a mistake as it's happening, and it's a mistake in terms of the cover-up and the mischaracterization and the false narrative coming out of it. And so, look, we get to choose our leaders, and people have to make a decision about who they want to lead them based on the totality of this information. And so that's now obviously part of the national discussion.
And in the end, it was Gaddafi forces, right, that went in and saved everyone?
Ironic. Isn't that unbelievable?
Yep.
So the very people that the administration was aligned against were the people that got our Americans evacuated out of Benghazi. None of the people that the administration had been building these relationships with over the previous 18 months. In fact, the information indicates that one of the top security guys with whom we had relied was actually next to one of the commanders the night of the attack against the United States.
How do you respond to the criticism that the Benghazi committee made a mistake by parceling out information, leaking out information, and then this report doesn't have anything new? It just is a compendium of everything we already know.
So it didn't happen that way. It wasn't the committee that leaked information out. It was Democrats on the committee that leaked information out. Democrats put out a report earlier this week that mentions Donald Trump 23 times, I think, just kind of completely absurd, who had nothing to do with this event at all. So it is a work that is a complete work insofar as the information was available. It's 800 pages. I know it sounds long, but I commend it to you. And it is meant to, number one, explain what actually happened, and number two, give recommendations moving forward so that it doesn't happen again. But when it comes down to it, this is, we choose people, and people are the ones who initiate, people are the ones who execute things, and people are the ones where the responsibility should lie.
And for people whose names we shouldn't forget, we see the media report the names of terrorists all the time. U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens, Foreign Service Officer Sean Smith, and CIA contractors Glenn Doherty and Tyrone Woods. Peter Roskam, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Guys.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.